You're listening to Best Forevers, a podcast for kindred spirits, a podcast that encourages you to love more on your friends and to further consider the issues that plague friendships. I'm Alysa Lucas, and friends, it's essentially a Dear Diary moment to be able to talk about the music group that I've been a fan of since 1986 when I was just 8 years old. Now, you might wonder how an 8-year-old becomes a fan of the Beastie Boys, a group described by the New York Times as a testosterone-driven pranksters, and their album License to Ill came out about fighting for a right to party, and maybe they were a little bit in on the joke, and maybe they were the joke, and maybe they learned from the joke. But here's the thing. I'm not sure why it happened, but I can tell you what did in fact happen. I stole my brother's License to Ill cassette tape and took that and my pink Sony player to Luton Elementary School. On recess, I took that cassette tape and played the sweet, sweet sounds of the B-Boys on that Sony player while my friends and I were on the tire swing. I was in the 3rd grade. My point is this, friends. It was early in my life when the Beastie Boys helped me bring friends together. And here I am 34 years later, and I can say is that not only have the Beastie Boys helped forge bonds, but we can also learn a lot about friendship from taking a look at the bond of 3 bad brothers we know so well. Ad Rock, aka Adam Horovitz, MCA, aka Adam Yauch, and Mike D, aka Michael Diamond. So today I'm going to wax intellectual about my favorite group, and we're going to take a glance at their friendship because I think it is one that can inspire so many other friendships. So many of you probably know the Beastie Boys because of License to Ill and fighting for a right to party, and what are they talking about girls doing dishes and in the bathroom and all that? What's that about? But you might remember the beats from Brass Monkey. It might have been your jam at the time. But really what we're dealing with here is a group that has sold over 20 million albums. They've won 3 Grammys, and they're the 3rd rap group to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You might say that they're one of the longest lasting hip-hop groups of all time. And so in more recent times, they released the Beastie Boys book in 2018, and I can thank my brother Michael for that. It was a very fine Christmas morning. Well, actually, it was a very Beastie Boys Christmas morning. And then in 2019, Mike D and Ad Rock did a tour where they shared their stories of being friends and being the Beastie Boys. My same brother saw this show in LA, and I was not envious at all. I was totally envious, friends. It's so sad. And last week, the Beastie Boys story, a doc movie created by Spike Jonze, was released on Apple TV+. And friends, it is totally worth getting Apple TV+ for this reason alone. The LA Times released an article this week. Should you watch Apple TV's Beastie Boys story? We debate. And I'm wondering why any fan would debate this. If you've listened to the Beastie Boys at any point in your life, you've seen them in concert at least once, or otherwise have enjoyed something of theirs, then there is no question of whether or not you should watch. Just do it. You won't regret it, because in short, it's a love story about friends that met and came together in the early 1980s over love for music and similar musical interests. They then experienced a whirlwind of success with License to Ill, and then have been on a journey ever since then to find and speak their own voice, musically and otherwise. Even if you don't call yourself a Beastie Boys enthusiast or fan, it's certainly an epic tale of nearly 40 years of friendship. And y'all, you know when I hear something like 40 years of friendship, it's like boop, 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 my ears perk up. It's like a little radar system. I'm all over it. It just so happens to be that I've been a part of this journey in some fashion as a fan for 34 years. And so to now see them talk about their friendship is something that warms my Beastie Boys loving heart, and my friendship loving heart for that matter. So it makes you go, how do people do that? How do people do friendship for nearly 40 years? What does that look like? Well, friends, let's dive into the friendship lessons that I gleaned from watching the Beastie Boys story this past weekend. For those who are unfamiliar, the Beastie Boys stands for Boys Entering Anarchistic States Toward Inner Excellence, which according to the members of the group do admit this is kind of a stupid name. And so that leads into the first lesson that we can take from the Beastie Boys. Friends have dumb jokes, but funny is important. One observation I made about the Beastie Boys, whether it was 8-year-old Alysa listening to License to Ill on the playground or 41-year-old Alysa watching the Beastie Boys story movie, is that they truly and genuinely seem to have fun together. Perhaps their young fun when they were younger was dumb, and perhaps even more, their current fun might be a little dumber. But they've been bullshitting and joking around and laughing for nearly 4 decades. Maybe what's important, fans, is that they've shared a lot of that fun and their dumb jokes because those funny and dumb jokes became lyrics in some of our favorite songs by then. So, in a way, you can see the Beastie Boys as having fun together as friends and letting us be in on the joke as well. I immediately think about how one of the most important qualities of friendship is enjoyment. We get to choose our friends, so we certainly want to have fun when we're around them. So if anyone needs one example of what friends having fun looks like, it's perhaps the Sabotage video, or the Hey Ladies video, or the Any video that was made by the Beastie Boys and probably directed by Adam Yauch. It looks like they're having the best time, and it looks like you want to be a part of it. You feel like you want to be a part of this fun. And isn't that what our friends are often for? Is that we can laugh, we can joke, we can bullshit. In this case, that fun and joking and bullshitting was also laying down beats, laying down lyrics, and creating all sorts of experiential music that has influenced so many of us as fans, but also so many of the people who've gone into the music industry. In the Beastie Boys story, Mike D and Ad Rock share the stories that led up to the release and tour of License to Ill, which included opening for Madonna. What's interesting is that they talk about the ridiculousness of their tour and they experience burnout from doing the same stupid stuff each night. And if you're not familiar, we're talking about caged girl dancers on stage and a 20-foot hydraulic penis. Like, they were just like, hey, they're asking us what we want on stage. Let's just tell them the most ridiculous things. And then they make it happen. And it might have been a joke. It was funny, right? It's funny when you're a teenager. It's funny when you're in your early 20s. But night after night after night, maybe it becomes a little bit depressing or a little bit of maybe this isn't funny so more. But one thing that can be said is that the fun among the three of them was always present, even when the tour might have turned sour for them. They still had fun and they still shared their funny with each other. And so, isn't that why we might want friends or even partners who have a sense of humor that we can make it through the tough times, even if we in some way might have created that for ourselves? So thinking about what they created with License to Ill, in the movie they talk about how they were making fun of these frat bro party guys and that in a way they became those guys by doing this tour, right? Where you have a hydraulic penis. Well, why not? That sounds like something they'd have at a frat party, right? And so the next lesson, I think, is an interesting take on their response to what that tour was like. And that lesson is, sometimes when we change, we don't know how to be a friend. It's like one day they made a song, and then the next day they were touring with Run DMC. And even living in a world now where a simple tweet can go viral, it's amazing how quickly the Beastie Boys became it. I mean, capital it. I mean, big it. They weren't thinking that they were going to be these rap stars on MTV, and here we are. After the License to Ill tour, they came home from, again, all that ridiculousness of their nightly shows. And both Mike D and Ad Rock highlight in the movie some important points about things that can go wrong with friendship. For example, Mike D talks about not calling his friends when you return because he didn't know how to relate to them. How do you relate to people when your life has changed so drastically in a short amount of time, right? Even more, Ad Rock talked about seeing one of their friends, Kate Schellenbach, after the tour. And specifically, Kate Schellenbach was part of the Beastie Boys. In fact, when the group was started in 1982, it was more of a punk rock sort of scenario, and it included Mike D, MCA, John Barry, and Kate Schellenbach. Well, John Barry left the group, and Adam Horovitz stepped in, and then at some point, Kate Schellenbach was also out of the Beastie Boys. So after they made it big with the License to Ill album, Ad Rock talked about seeing Kate Schellenbach in a sandwich shop and essentially hiding from her. She was an original Beastie Boy and friends of the trio, but when they started spending more time with Rick Rubin and Russell Simmons to make License to Ill happen, the less time they spent with their other friends like Kate. Or maybe Kate decided to spend less time with them. So, how do you reconnect with a friend that maybe would be, could be, or should be part of the success you've had? And you feel like you may have been a mistake or you've done something wrong. In the movie, Ad Rock says that maybe he didn't reach out to her when he saw her in that sandwich shop because he was embarrassed about how much he had changed. And I think this is a really interesting point. Obviously, not all of us will become famous as quickly as the Beastie Boys did or under the circumstances of License to Ill. But we do go through changes and we do go through transitions. And when things aren't going the way that we exactly want them to, or when we're reflecting on it and thinking about how things are not as they used to be, how do we go forward? They were still so young at this point, but I think it is a lesson to learn early on that was probably important in life. When changes happen, when we grow, our friendships are going to have growing pains. It makes being friends more difficult, and it may in fact lead to the end of a friendship. But simply put, even if sad, these things happen, and they happen a lot. It's sad and disappointing, and it produces feelings of rejection, but in some cases, it can be for the best. It's not up for me to decide whether or not their change in friendship was best for both of them. I thought this was an important moment in the movie, thinking about how life had changed so drastically for them. And just because our life changes doesn't mean it doesn't impact all the people around us. But I think it brings up a good question of how we adjust friendships to account for the changes we've experienced, whether good or bad. It's certainly something that we could reflect on, and maybe we could save some friendships or maybe end them in a more respectful and kind way. This leads us to lesson number 3, and that is sometimes friends drift apart and they can come back together. So after the success of License to Ill, Ad Rock noted in the movie that they stopped talking. He was in LA and they were back in New York, and he said there was no falling out, but that it was the first time they just didn't want to hang out. And, I've talked about this before, ghosting, friendships can fade away, and honestly, sometimes we just simply need a break from people. And it seems like after doing these ridiculous shows every night, as they described being dicks, they may all need that time to get their own shit together. I can think of a time when I was working for the state of Michigan and I was having some difficulties with a friend, and a new, older, more mature friend said to me, "You don't always have to be present for your friends at any given time. You can miss a phone call and go back to them when you're ready." And sometimes it's not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything, fatally wrong in the friendship. It's sometimes we just need a break. And the time away from people we love, especially with people we spend an inordinate amount of time with, can be helpful to center oneself. But it also can be the first stage of a phase out, for example. It's natural for friends to drift apart, but what's cool is when they can come back together. And that coming back together is like not even a day has gone by. And I'm sure so many of us can relate to that, right? This idea that you didn't see a friend for months and you pick up the phone and you talk, or you see each other, or now you Zoom, and it's like not a second has gone by. There are some friends that can pick up no matter the time or the distance, and that is certainly a special kind of friendship. So when Ad Rock was in LA and Adam and Mike were in New York, MCA sent a package to Ad Rock. He describes it in the movie. It was a box. Then it was a box inside a box, and then a box, and so on and so forth. I love when people do that. It's like this giant box, and then 45 minutes later of unwrapping, it's like the tiniest thing that you can get in there. And what he said was there was coffee grounds, and then inside was a cassette tape for MCA's other band, Brooklyn. It was a way for MCA to connect with his friend and to share with his friend. And how many of us do these sort of small gestures? We reach out, we connect, we say, we're still here, we still love you, we still friends, I still want your input. Maybe he wanted his friend to listen to it, to give feedback. And even Ad Rock says it could have been a sign of friendship, or maybe was he trying to say that the Beastie Boys were done? The lesson here is that some friends will drift apart and some will come back together. Perhaps the ones that come back together were meant to be, or that one or more of the friends involved really worked at maintaining the friendship. So you wonder what might have happened had MCA not sent that package. Would they just have kept their distance? And would we not have gotten Paul's Boutique, the second album that they released, or therefore any album after that? Or maybe there would have been a longer delay between their first and their second album. So really, what I liked about this part that they talked about, they highlighted whether they intended to or not, was that sometimes we do need a break. Sometimes people drift. It's natural. And if you're friends, you're going to come back together, and that coming back together can be the good stuff. And when you come back together, you got to get it together, right? Which is the fourth lesson that I learned about friendship from watching the Beastie Boys story. And that is, if you build a hangout, they will come. And then in parentheses, I wrote, within appropriate social distance, of course. Okay. So what I love about this is that the Beastie Boys seem to be all in on what they're doing, on their relationship together. They created a space for themselves that would form a lot of special friendship time. That would lead to space to make music, space to bond, space to make memories. And how often do we actually do that? How often do we make space for our friends? Now, they certainly had the means to rent a super expensive house in LA with lots of retro vibes, and they would find ensembles from the 70s and dress up and wear them. And Ad Rock talked about having a room that faced the pool, like literally a window looking into the pool, where MCA would jump into the pool, knock on the window, and wake him up for a breakfast. I mean, what a memory there. And although we don't have to rent a house in LA to make these times happen, we can create space for our friends. How do we have space where we can have that special time together? When we look at our schedules and we say, we're too busy for that. Friendship is often, oh, when are you available? Do you want, what about now? And it's just, you are going back and forth when you're available until until the end of time. And I know it can be hard right now, but this is when, with COVID-19, where we can be creative about making space. There's lots of ways to do it. And thankfully, we have the technology that can support us with that. But what I like is that they were doing it. They were doing it way back in the day. And it seems to be something that had continued for them, that they had a place to hang. So I think that is the lesson here, is that we should make time for our friends. They had the means and motivation, and they also had the goal for collaboration, but they had those goals. They had the motivation. We can find those things as well. And continuing on, they built a studio. They had space where they could play basketball, skateboard, make music, and so many other friends would join them. It would be that hangout. If you build the hangout, they will come. Again, with appropriate social distance, of course. As the movie goes on, and we learn more about the Beastie Boys, and I believe that we know a lot about them from their music, and we know a lot about them from interviews that they perhaps have done over their long career. And that is that they are collaborators. And I think this is one of the parts of the movie that really stuck out for me. To me, I thought this was just very special. And that is, friends can survive transformation, and they can cultivate it too. So they started with License to Ill, which was a mainstream hit. And I think the assumption was that they had no part in it, and it was all created for them. So then what came next, after MCA sent that box upon box upon box that include that cassette tape of his music, was that they all moved out to LA, right? To that special space and to that expensive LA 70s vibe house. And what they did there, through all that time they had, they then went on to make Paul's Boutique. They did everything themselves. Now, this album, I think, would ultimately be called a flop, but here's the thing. It is often on the list for the most underrated albums of all time, but it is also one of my favorite albums of theirs, because you can see their growth. You can see them starting to create their voice, and the layered beats and the layered samples and all the things that they're trying and that they're doing. And then as we get more albums like Check Your Head and Ill Communication, Hello Nasty, to the Five Boroughs, the Mix Up, Hot Sauce Committee Part 2, what you see is that they become who they want to be. They create whatever they want. They call it the mixtape of what they're interested in, the music that inspires them, the music they want to make, the lyrics they want to say, and it becomes something where they become their own influential entity. They are the Beastie Boys. They are not something created in a studio. They're someone who creates that studio and then has created their own sound and has continued to be experiential with their music making over time. Like I said, I think this is one of the most insightful parts of the Beastie Boys story, and specifically that being that they are supportive in the interests and changes of others. For example, when MCA became interested in Tibet and traveled there, wanted to do music on it, and created the Free Tibet concert, they were all like, hell yeah, that's cool, let's do it, let's make that music. Or if someone's like, hey, what about this? Or just them talking about how one bass line turned into what we now know as sabotage, like how one idea, this evolution of thinking, right, that over time they talked about how, quote, they changed how they wanted to be a band, people, and friends. And they said, we didn't grow up, we wised up. And they encouraged each other to do and say what they wanted. And this might be chalked up to maturity, because looking back on their career, they can see that everything that they've been created, including maybe the joke of License to Ill, that maybe, again, they're still in on that joke, that they know that what they make has an impact on other people. And so you can see this transformation through interest, through music, through changing from when they were teenagers until now, right? And one of the things that really stood out to me is the Song of Man. And a reporter called Ad Rock a hypocrite for making a song that was, say, more supportive than their original song, Girls. And Adam said to the reporter, I'd rather be a hypocrite than the same person forever. And Mike D is detailing the story, and he said that this was something that made him proud to be Adam's friend. And so what that says to me is there is a lot of respect in this friendship, and the respect leads to understanding transformation, understanding that you can cultivate it together, that you understand that you're not going to be the same person when you're a teenager and when you're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, right? That we're not going to be. That if we were, then we're not open. We're not willing to hear what other people have to say, which would make it impossible to be collaborators. And it can be very difficult for friends to be business partners, to work on things together. But when you got it, you got it. And they certainly have it. And that doesn't come without difficulties or arguments or being like, that doesn't sound good, or I don't know about that, or that doesn't reflect me. But the fact that they respect each other enough and are mature enough to say, this is your interest, that sounds cool, this might not work for me, how can we do this differently? That is not only cultivating the transformation, it's respecting it. And to me, those are the kind of friends we need, right? These are the people who are going to be like our hype person. When I can only imagine when like Adam Yauch came in and played that bass line that becomes Sabotage, and they're all like, oh shit, like the hype man, like, yeah, right? Like that's the jam, right? And then being like, all right, what if we add this in? Oh, I don't know if that sounds right. Well, let's tweak it like this. And how that comes to be when people are willing and motivated and care and have that respect. It's just amazing to see. And I think because of all of that, we have these 8 studio albums, right? This is why we have, as fans, the ability to listen to so much great music, because of their ability to respect and cultivate transformation and collaboration and change. Like, it's just amazing. Sorry, this is, I mean, I've been worked up this whole episode, but I mean, this is just 2 of the things I love the most. It's like the Beastie Boys and friendship. It's like my head and my heart are about to explode. And that's where it really comes together in the 6th and final lessons. We will all have friends, but some of us have once in a lifetime friends. On May 4th, 2012, Adam Yauch succumbed to cancer. And just 3 years before at Bonnaroo, they didn't know that it was going to be the last time that the 3 of them would play together. And in the movie, they talk about what it was like to be friends with Adam Yauch, who, if you have time, look this man up, because what an absolute inspiration and legendary person, I can only imagine what it must have been like to be his friend. They talk about how they still laugh and they're still family, and that, I mean, it's clear that they're missing a part of them and missing Adam Yauch, but he certainly has left an impact on them and will for the rest of their lives. They talk about the joy of being able to show up to work every day, to work with their two best friends, and kind of laugh about the fact that they spent more time with each other than they did with their own families. And so I'd like to quote a portion of the movie that comes at about an hour and 39 minutes. And this is Mike D and Ad Rock going back and forth. "We all different kind of friends. There's the one that's kind of an asshole, but fun to be around once in a while. Fun to get drunk and talk shit with, but you never call on them for physical or emotional help because they're just unreliable. Or there's the friend you see once in a while and it's nice to hang out and you're always like, I should hang out with that person and I should spend more time with that person, but for some reason you just don't. Then there's the true friend, the one you'd be on the phone with forever. The one that helps you move or meets you at the hospital or has a permanent spot on their couch for you in case you may ever need it. Now, those type of friends are rare, we all know. But there's even a rarer type of friend. The one that gets you motivated. The one that not only gets themselves going and doing great things, but says we should all get together and do this. And then does it. Adam Yauch was that type of friend. A once-in-a-lifetime kind of friend. The friend that makes it happen. The friend that inspires you to go big. And they go on to talk about all the amazing things that he did for Free Tibet and as a filmmaker, as a musician, and as a friend. And as I was sitting there, the joy and pride but also sadness for their friend who had meant so much to them, who has done so much that none of us could imagine a friend like that, right? That they were two lucky people to have Adam Yauch in their life, and to have Adam Yauch, it certainly sounds like you would be lucky as well. So I certainly hope that you all have an Adam Yauch in your life. You have a friend like him, the once-in-a-lifetime kind of friend. And I think we know what that means. That's not going to be everyone that we categorize. It's going to be that one person that is so special. We think every single day, how is this person my friend? How did we meet? Who brought you to me? How did this happen? Oh, well, it doesn't matter. I'm just so glad that we found each other. The Beastie Boys story is an epic love tale of friendship. And not only is that something that I am so excited about, just so happy to see, because friendship is often neglected, to be able to hear this tale from their mouths themselves, from all the videos they have, all the pictures they've taken, all the shared memories, all the shared joys, all the difficulties that they are willing to put out there and in the open for us to understand what it would have been like to be a Beastie Boy. And not only that, I think that something that really extends this even further and why it's so important is that oftentimes we don't hear enough about male friendship. Not only do we not hear enough about friends among men, we don't hear about it from their mouths specifically. So I thank Ad Rock and I thank Mike D, because we need more friends like them, and we need to hear more stories of friendship like this. What an epic tale of friendship that lasted over 40 years. So I want to know, friends, who is your once-in-a-lifetime kind of friend? What are they like? How did you come together? And additionally, what lessons have you learned about friendship? These are the lessons that I can extrapolate from watching this movie about the Beastie Boys. I'm sure if I was able to talk to them one-on-one, I mean, I might Ralph a little bit. I've had a crush on Ad Rock since I was 8, but I'm saying that there's so much that could be learned. But I think these are 6 important lessons that we can glean from them. And boy, what an inspiration it is to be a friend and to be a Beastie. So until next time, friends, think about what inspires you to be a once-in-a-lifetime kind of friend. Because without our friends, who would we be? Thanks for listening listening to Best Forevers. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and of course, share with a friend. Please be sure to follow Best Forevers on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Best Forevers Pod, and I'm at Dr. Alysa Lucas on Twitter. You can always find the podcast webpage for more information at bestforeverspod.com, and share your stories of friendship by emailing me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the movement to love on our friends more, check out the podcast on patreon.com/bestforeverspod. Now, friends, check out this recommended podcast that you must get in your ear holes immediately.
Hi everyone, we're your beer drinking babes. I'm Ashley.
And I'm Maggie, and we're from Rock Candy Podcast.
Every week we bring you a story from the world of music while drinking thematic beers.
Did you ever wonder how much Charles Manson inspired the music you love today?
Did you know that Joy Division and New Order are virtually the same band?
Are you aware of how weird Kesha really is? Like how she had sex with a ghost?
Do you also not understand what Post Malone is? Because we don't.
Well, we got you covered. Behind the Music isn't around anymore, but we're here to pick up the slack.
And be a little drunker.
Yeah, so go ahead and look for Rock Candy Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or wherever you catch your pods. And with that, party on, kids.
Party on.